Yo, what is up? My name is Dominik, but they call me Wodzu, and welcome to the second episode of the How to Trap Metal series. Today we're gonna focus on drums. I am super grateful and I'm super happy with the engagement under the last trap metal video, the long one, the first one. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button with all the notifications. If you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up, leave a comment. It helps a lot and it motivates me like crazy if I see that you like my videos, and it helps the channel grow. I'm recording this the day after I've recorded the first episode, so I'm still a little bit sick, as you can hear, but as usual, nothing can stop us from making dope music, so let's begin. In general, trap metal came as a combination between metal and trap music, and those two have something really important in common. Drums play a huge role in metal as well as they play a huge role in trap music. A typical metal song has double bass, has blast beats, has a lot of elements really typical for that kind of style, and trap beats, to be honest, have some similarities, like patterns like you know what I mean. I don't mean to offend metal nor trap, I'm just talking about the typical rhythm patterns present in both of those styles. And in both of those styles, the drums are really punchy, really heavy. You know, you can hear the snare really well. It plays a huge role. It's like the base of everything. So now we're going to make a trap metal drum kit. First of all, let's create a drum bus. And then we're going to add a few more tracks. First one will be heads, second one will be snare, third one will be clap, and the fourth one will be kick. Now let's open inserts on the heads track and let's add resamplomatic. For the purpose of this tutorial, I won't be using a trap metal ready samples. I will turn something which is not made to be a trap metal sample pack into a trap metal sample pack. I'm using Cymatic's Cobra sample pack, which is free. The download link is in the description down below. And here we have drums one-shots. Let's start from the cymbals and closed hi-hats. And now here we have all the samples from this folder. A quick reminder, if you haven't watched an episode about drum samples in Reaper, in order to activate velocity in this sampler, so you will have quieter and louder sounds depending on how hard you hit the pad or how much velocity you set, take the minimum volume knob down to infinite. Now, while holding shift, I will select all the tracks I have already, and I will press the right button of the mouse on this meter and set the input to all MIDI inputs I have, so including the MPD right here. Now I will turn on input monitoring, and when I arm the hats for recording, I will hear the hi-hat. And as we turn the minimum volume down to infinite, I can press the pedal really lightly and the sound is really quiet, or hit it harder and it's louder. Now in the mixer section, I will just drag and drop this instance of resamplomatic on all the tracks so I can select the samples. But first, let's focus on the hi-hat. Basically, there is no typical hi-hat as far as trap metal beats are concerned, but usually it's not a super bright type of hi-hat. It's often tuned a little bit lower, so it's a little bit darker and has a different feeling to it. So let's select the sample. This one is pretty nice. Let's make it a little bit lower, just a little. Maybe one semitone lower. Okay, it's pretty okay. Now the snare. The snare has to have a decent punch, and I like when the snares in trap metal beats sound more like an acoustic snare, not like the synthesized snare from Roland TR-808 or something. I want this to be more kind of acoustic snare. It can be a hybrid snare, so a sample from TR-808 combined with an acoustic snare, and that sounds great in most of the cases. So we go to snares. Let's select this very typical snare. Then let's just copy and paste resamplomatic, and let's select another sample. Here we have a more clap kind of sound, but with a really high attack. So we have this typical snare and this clappy snare. That's how they sound together. We can make this snare louder. But let's open another instance and let's add this sound. And now we've combined those three samples together and they don't sound typical. It sounds just more interesting. It has some lower frequencies, it has some sizzle from this clappy snare, it has this typical sound. So it's snappy, it's bright, it has a lot of attack. It's decent. What we can also do is we can change the envelope here on this very last snare. So we only hear the attack of it. Yeah, that is right. And now we can make it louder. This is this very attacky sound. That's how they sound separately. Here is the sound we've just made. This really short, really spiky attack. Here is the clappy snare. It has a lot of attack, a lot of the sizzle, and then with the traditional snare, the polo snare. It just added the character in the mid-range. It's a great snare sound. There is no real philosophy as far as the claps are concerned. Just find something that suits you. I usually don't like the claps to be so clappy. I like them to be more like a snap. This one sounds pretty fine. And the very last thing is the kick. I think the kick is the most important part of a trap metal drum kit. The kick is responsible for giving the whole beat a punch and, you know, to accent the 808s. Everything is heavy thanks to the kick. So let's browse through the kicks in Cobra sample pack. The last one, the kick number 9. It's a really nice kick to start with, so we can make it more heavy. It's really punchy. It's already really punchy, has a lot of low end and a lot of frequencies around 100 Hz. Now I will record a really simple drum pattern real quick, so we can colorize the sound of the drums with saturation, EQ and that kind of stuff. And those are only the raw samples. Nothing is mixed, zero reverb, zero effects, anything. So now I will just open my mixing template where I have all my reverb sends prepared. I will copy the drum bus we've made with the samples we've made. First of all, let's start from the kick as the most important thing, as I've told you. Let's load Re-EQ, the basic equalizer in Reaper. Let's make it a little bit bigger so we can see what's happening here. Let's select everything, let's loop it so we can hear and we can talk. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the high end a little bit, because just see. When the kick is playing, there is something happening here. You can't really hear it because there is a really quiet sound right here above like 5K, but we don't really need it. So let's cut everything around 10K. It doesn't have to be that kind of a curve, just make it more like that. Okay. Now let's make a few boosts. In order to make a boost, I'm just taking another band, make it more narrow because it's too wide. And I'm going to sweep through the spectrum while listening to the kick and look for a sound that's not too boxy, that will add the punchiness to the kick. In this case, it will be somewhere around 200 Hz, because 100 Hz has a lot of bass, 200 Hz has this characteristic punch. In order to let you hear it better, I will load Neutron. If you haven't watched the first episode, it's just a plugin that contains a bunch of really precise mixing plugins. And we will listen to 200 Hz only in order to, you know, make you realize what's happening here. I'm soloing the kick. This is 200 Hz. And this is 100 Hz. 100 Hz is really punchy, has a lot of bass, but 200 Hz here have just this higher punch, so we can add it. Okay, so the kick is more punchy, it doesn't have the high end, but we can also look for something more clicky in the higher frequencies. This frequency, around 1.3 K, is just really interesting. Let's listen to it with neutron. 1.3 K, something like that. It has this really nice mid-range click to it. Now in neutron, I'm going to load up the exciter, select the spectrum from around 150 to around 600 Hertz, and let's saturate this really low mid-range. And we can also use some higher frequency saturation above the spectrum to add some more clickiness, you know, to make this kick more easy to hear on devices such as laptops, smartphones, that kind of stuff. For this purpose, we are using tape or tube saturation. Tube is the most aggressive saturation here in neutron. Tape is less aggressive. Remember that you can also use the saturation which is built into Reaper. I just prefer to use this module. It's much more easy to use. So I just use what I have. I'm reducing the high end a little bit. And now the kick is super punchy, super clicky, and you can hear it even in the higher register. The clap doesn't really need a lot, just cut out everything below 100 Hertz if there's happening something here, and it's almost ready to go. It depends on the sample, of course, but this sample is already really loud. Really, I can hear everything I want to hear. It's really clappy, right? The snare. Let's focus on the snare. First of all, let's load re-EQ as we did with the kick. This snare has a lot of high end, so let's reduce it a little bit. Okay, next thing is to cut out the low end, because we don't really need anything below 100 Hertz. Maybe let's leave something, because we don't want to cut all the bass from the snare, because it would lose all the punchiness. But just, you know, don't leave it like that. Cut something, at least below 50 Hertz. Just move the filter to the right, and when the snare starts losing the fullness, the punchiness, just stop there. Don't let it, you know, change the sound a lot. The reason why we are doing this is because kick has the biggest spectrum right here. So this is the place for the kick. There is no room for snare here. So let's leave the 50 Hertz and all the frequencies around for the kick, and let's leave the mid-range for the snare and the high end for the hi-hat. You can of course boost something here, for example around 5 to 10K, but this snare sounds great so far. It depends on the circumstances, because it may sound really good in one beat and you may change it in some other beat. You can't really make a full mix of the drums without the full context, you know, because the mix of the drums, the final mix, will depend on the instruments that will be used in that beat. You know, maybe you will use some specific kind of lead that will just, you know, argue with some frequencies with boosted here. So we are not boosting a lot of frequencies, really, just in the kick in this scenario. And the last thing, the hi-hats. There is something happening here. There's something jumping here, so it means there is an information. So we don't want this information. We only want the higher frequency, and we can make a little narrow boost and just find the frequency that clicks the most and it's not irritating your ear. So find something pleasant in that hi-hat and you can boost it a little bit. Oh, for example, right here it has this pleasant sizzle, but here it's just, you know, too clicky. So I'll just boost it right here a little bit. And that's how the full drums sound like. they sound much better. And here is how they sound without the effects. And those are only the basic steps. We've just EQ'd all the things, we cut out the things we don't want to hear, and we've boosted the things we want to hear more. So that's really everything as far as the equalizer is concerned. And we've of course saturated the kick, but that's just an addition. Now let's add some space to these drums, because everything is super dry, super raw. It's really punchy, it's really aggressive, but everything is here close to you. So let's add some reverb to the hi-hats, to the snare, and maybe to the clap. And don't add reverb to the kick, at least not to the lower frequencies, because that's a really big mistake, and it usually sounds like that. Let me demonstrate to you. We don't really want that. Okay, so here I have a few reverbs loaded in, vocal reverb, plate reverb, TC tail, which is a really long reverb, and plate bright, which is a really long, really bright reverb. We're not going to use it today. I'm going to add one more track, which will be a drum reverb. For this drum reverb, I will use Epic Verb from the Variety of Sound. It's a free plugin. And here's a preset I really like, Modern Drums. Let's start from the snare. Let's send the snare to the drum reverb. This is a really short reverb. It's like a small room, and you can hear some reflections. So we don't want that much of this reverb, but it will place this snare in that room. The difference is here. You can hear the reflection, the response of the reverb with the snare. It's not that raw as it was. And let's turn it off. And let's turn it on. It definitely does its job. Okay, next reverb we're gonna add is the plate reverb. It's much more huge, so don't get scared. Less. It just adds this ambience around the snare. We don't need a lot of the ambience. It depends, of course, of the beat of the song, but in general, you don't really want to make something like that. No. Now the hi-hats. I usually place the hi-hats in the plate reverb, and I'm just making less reverb. They are just a little bit more spacey. I usually copy the same reverb sends from snare to the clap, and in order to do this, we are moving to the mixer. Just drag and drop those sends here to the clap track, and it's done. I'm doing this because clap plays in a really similar spectrum as snare, on a really similar sound height, and it's just a time saver. And that's how our drum loop sounds without the reverb. And that's how our drum loop sounds with the reverb. It has much more life. It's actually happening in a certain environment. It's not raw, it's not, you know, super dry. Now we can of course add some additional stuff such as crash and some other symbols, you know, make it more interesting. Let's use this crash. We can also place it in a huge reverb like the plate reverb. We can also send it to the delay bus, so we can hear some delay reflections in the background. And let's use another crash. Let's copy and paste it. Just a really simple, regular pattern. About leveling drums, so setting the volume of certain parts, you can't really do it until you have the rest of the beat. You can of course set the volumes like, you know, for this very moment, but you, for example, will want to make the snare louder afterwards or quieter. So you can't mix drums when you only have the drums. Make sure that kick is there, that snare doesn't rip your ears off, that hi-hats don't get lost in the background, and everything should be fine. The clap should be a little quieter than the snare, in my opinion. It's not a rule, but I just don't like this to be the same volume as the snare is. It's supposed to be less important than the snare. And we can also try to add some pre-made loop from the pack. And is it the end of the video? It could be, but it's not. Now we're gonna compress the drum bus. Here comes the almighty compression and the compressor, the thing people used to fear a lot, and lots of people just don't really know how to use compressor, and you know, they think it's really hard, where it's actually not that hard. For the compression, I'm going to use isotope neutron, and I'm going to turn on the compressor here, but you can do it in any compressor really. I suggest using multi-band compression as far as the drums are concerned. Multi-band compression is like a few compressors in one plugin. So you can compress some spectrums differently. So the kick has different attack than hi-hats, for example. And here I'm going to prepare 3 spectrums and I'm going to use the learn feature. What the learn feature does, it just sets the spectrums for me, so I don't have to divide this by myself and experiment for 5 minutes. But usually the low end is like it was set here, below 250, below 200 Hertz. The mid-range is from 200 Hertz and to around 3K or to 5K. It really depends on the samples you've used, of the sound height, of, you know, the amount of certain frequencies. Let's start from the low end. We're going to solo it. I'm going to turn off the reverbs and delays for this purpose. Okay, this is the low end. You can only hear the punch. So if you don't hear anything, just use headphones. Okay, it's not compressed yet. Let's lower the threshold and it starts compressing. We don't want to compress it a lot. We don't really need that kind of compression. As we already know, the kick is really punchy. So this means the sound happens really quickly, and 20 milliseconds of attack is a little bit too much. So just lower it to somewhere around 3 to 5 milliseconds. That's just a matter of how much attack does your kick have. Okay, now the release. The attack was the parameter that was telling us how fast the compressor will start working. So we wanted it to catch the kick really quickly, so it's 2 milliseconds, and the release is how it stops working. So we don't really need 100 milliseconds. Let's set it to somewhere around 20 to 30 milliseconds. It is an aggressive compression. And here's the ratio. Ratio tells us how much, what part of the signal is compressed. If the ratio is really high, the kick goes really compressed. It's not punchy anymore. We don't want that. We want to compress it a little bit. So let's leave the ratio around 3 to 1. Okay, next spectrum, mid-range. As you can hear in the mid-range, you can still hear some part of the kick, you can hear the snare, and you can hear the hi-hat. So it's the most dynamic and the most important part of the spectrum. We're going to use an attack of around 5 milliseconds with release around 30 milliseconds, and the ratio like 4 to 1 should do the job. We can use the makeup to make this frequency range louder. Now you can hear the low end and the mid-range. And now the high end. You can compress the high end here, but here I think we would not hear any benefits, because there is only the hi-hat and the higher parts from the snare here. So everything is on the same level, and it's really bright, really punchy, so it's okay. We can add some makeup to the low end. And this is just the first very basic compression of the drums, because I like to compress everything more at the end of the mix and mastering. So I just took the control of the low end and of the mid-range in drums right here. But we're going to talk more about that in the episode about the full mix, and then in the episode about mastering. Let's turn on the reverbs and let's listen to the final result. You know, I will try to play a guitar riff, just, you know, in order to test how will it sound with the guitar. I think the beat with this drum loop will be one of my best trapmetal beats ever so far. You know, with all these trapmetal beats, like, I feel like a duck to water. Because that's a combination of the two styles of music I really like, metal and trap, because I admire trap music as much as I admire metal music. I'm mostly listening to trap nowadays, and all the kinds of rap music, mostly dark rap, Suicide Boys, Bones, Ghostmane, but also to some like more typical artists from the trap scene, so the hip-hop kind of trap music. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, turn on all the notifications so you won't miss any new video. Follow me on Instagram for some other types of content and the announcements about the videos here on YouTube. I'm doing some contests and giveaways and, you know, discount codes from time to time, so you might be interested. If you want to get some free guitar samples, remember to subscribe to my newsletter for the awesome guitar sample pack that will be released in January. And all the people that will subscribe to the list will get a free version of the sample pack for free. And there won't be any other option to get the free version of the sample pack outside the mailing list. So leave your emails, link is in the description down below. And tell me, what would you want to see in this series too? The next episode will be about recording real guitars. So how to set up an amplifier, so I'll tell you about all the stuff connected with it. And yeah, that's really it for today. My name is Dominic, you've been watching wodzubeats, and keep the good vibes alive.
Production.